And we're live for episode 153 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Dan?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to do a deep dive into a character spotlight. We've done this before. Excited to kind of keep the train rolling, not just with character spotlights, but with kind of the line of topics, the run of topics that we're going to be doing in the next month. They kind of, if you look pretty close, they kind of have this connective tissue, so I'm excited to kick it off.
Yeah, there's some unconventionalness to it, but Times Arrow into Data, and then we're kind of doubling back to, we're doing a couple of big two-part episode topics. So we're kind of all in the same ballpark, going from topic to topic for January. But yeah, it's been a while since we did a character spotlight. The last one we did was on, I think, another TNG character. Deanna, I want to say?
It was Kes, no? I believe.
Oh, it might have been Kes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've done a handful of these, and I think what I'm going to do is I have a playlist up for a couple of our running topics. We have one for the fantasy drafts that we do, the Guess Each Other series, and I think I'm going to go back this week and put together a nice little playlist on the YouTube channel for all our character spotlights. Just kind of make it easy for us even to just kind of quickly take inventory of who have we done, what's our next one. It'll make it easy for us and hopefully easy for you as a viewer potentially to hone in on some of those older videos because it goes back a little ways. Been doing these for a little bit. So, Data's obviously a serious heavyweight in Star Trek's history, and I think the thing that attracted us to really dive into him is now there's some new context, even in this last year in 2020 with Picard, and with that I think it it's an interesting time with some reflection on how that show ended and what that show was about and how it dealt with character of Data, to look at Data as a whole now. With that kind of new ending in mind, and that Nemesis wasn't the last thing we see of Data. So before we do that, though, as we always do, let's check in on each other's rewatches, where we currently stand, anything we've recently watched. I think last week you talked about
past tense.
Past tense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you stopped at past tense. Where are you now?
So I am now at my next episode is Prophet Motive. So
okay.
I've watched 3 episodes. I've watched Life Support, Heart of Stone, and Destiny. Starting to definitely heat up. So there's those kind of run of episodes I definitely liked. I think probably my favorite out of the 3 is probably Heart of Stone. I really, really enjoyed the Nog stuff. I always forget about that storyline whenever I go through Deep Space Nine, but the stuff with Odo as well is good. I really like that as well. You guys know me. I'm really a cheesy kind of shipper at heart, so episode really works for me.
Yeah, Heart of Stone is really all about those 2 characters, Nog and Odo, kind of letting loose on long-held secrets,
yes.
Things they've been holding on to, and 2 very different characters and 2 very different things that they're holding tight that they ultimately end up having to let go of, but they're both big steps forward for where those characters are going, and
big time.
I think they're big major it's an important episode for both of those characters. I think it sets into motion major elements of both of their arcs. So yeah, I definitely think you're kind of at that point in Deep Space Nine where it's kind of shed its training wheels. It's much more its own show at this point. I think it's really found its sea legs, and in the first couple of seasons, that there were certainly episodes that felt of a piece with episodes from The Next Generation, which was running at the same time.
Yeah, shedding that title a little bit.
Yeah, I think the kinds of stories that Deep Space Nine's deferring to at this point where you are in that run midway point of season 3 is far less often stories that feel like they could be kind of repackaged and told on the Next Generation. These stories feel really specific to Deep Space Nine and important to Deep Space Nine's overall arc. I think all three of the ones you watched, Life Support is very baked into the sort of big picture story of Deep Space Nine and the Bajorans and the Cardassians with Bareil and Kira and Kai Wynn and negotiating with Cardassians. Like, there's big picture DS9 stuff in that episode.
Yes.
But it's also a classic Star Trek kind of morality tale about, what is life and at what point does, the medical science, kind of replace who this person is, like with artificial, parts, basically. There's some interesting things to chew on and think about there. Heart of Stone with character stuff we just talked about. And Destiny is very much about, again, the Bajoran mythology and Sisko's role in it. His comfort level with where he stands in the whole thing is all explored there. So these are very specific DS9 stories that you just hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me, I'm into DS9 season 2, TNG season 7. The last things I watched for both were Melora for DS9 season 2, which we talked about actually a good bit on our DS9 season 2 kind of sum up video, and Dark Page for TNG. So TNG's been kind of rough going for me in this early part of season 7. I really like Gambit. I'm actually a much... I asked some questions about Phantasms when I hit that one on Twitter, and I got a lot of mixed feedback. A lot of people are not huge on it. It kind of fits into the kind of mind bleep horror kind of episodes, like Night Terrors, and I think people lump it in with like Violations and stories like that get into like inner psyche, psychological thriller kind of thing. And I think it's easy to kind of put those together, and if you're not into that kind of thing, that they're all kind of cool and not very cold and not successes. That was the impression I was gathering from a lot of the responses on Twitter. I think my favorite of those bunch of episodes is probably Phantasms. I think I'm much higher on it than a lot of other people. It's not a favorite. It's not one of my all-timers, but I like that it commits to being completely insane. And, it's a little more fun for me than some of those other episodes that I think it's easy to compare it to. So, I
definitely like it just because it feels like an extension of a dreamscape, or like a really exploring a dream sequence, and I think it kind of stays true to that, even though it's completely out the door as far as being pretty crazy. But I guess that's kind of what they're going for with dreams and things like that. That's how I was always seeing it.
Yeah. And it's actually, there's some important continuity there too. Back in season 6, in Birthright Part 1, Data decides to start he finds this program in his own programming that allows him to dream, basically, and he's been experimenting with that ability to like basically deactivate, go to sleep, and have subconscious things play out in his mind. And this is a follow-up to that. Like, he's continued to do that, and now he's starting to have nightmares and creepy experiences in that program. So I think this is, speaking of Data, that we're going to get into here in a second, I feel like that's one of the cool little serialized elements to his character arc. Later in the show, one of the things he tries to learn about and experience is dreaming. And Phantasms is definitely a major part of that. So let's get into the topic at hand and just talk about Data. We don't plan these. We don't do like hardcore scripts and have talking points to come in with. We're just going to kind of talk about Data and see where it goes, what's on each other's minds, what are the things that flash into our minds right away, most prominent thoughts when we talk about him. So where does Data sit in your, like, if you're thinking about TNG characters and Star Trek characters as a whole? Is he, in the upper tier? Like, does he come to mind right away? Is he a major part of Next Generation for you? Is he just part of the ensemble? Or are you not fond of him? Like, what's your overall kind of impression of Data and where he fits into the whole
No, I'm a big Data fan. I think he's definitely in the top tier as far as TNG characters goes. A lot of fun things to explore. The outsider kind of character type has been done in Star Trek before. Obviously, there's been some great ones. But with Data, the thing that I really like is his just his ability and his want to be able to explore, not just obviously as a Starfleet officer, explore everything, but explore himself and explore things like you said with the dream stuff. And I think what makes that kind of unique to the character, Data being a character, is he's kind of paired with Picard a little bit, in my opinion, where I think both of them were working through connecting with people and finding their human side. And I really do like that. That's kind of one of the staples of that character is when you pair it with Picard, this role model, this deep friendship that they have between each other. Them both, especially Data, trying to explore emotions and things like that. I think Picard's doing the same thing. I'm trying not to make this about Picard, but I'll reel back to Data. But I think that exploration and that fascination with the human emotion and other things that make people human, using this character who's an android, I think is just a wonderful, cool thing. So that's my kind of overall thoughts, I guess.
I agree with all that.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think the relationship with Picard, as obviously shown in Star Trek Picard, as how it kind of gets to how deep that was and how important it was to Picard, is a clear, important benchmark in any conversation about Data. So it goes without saying, I think, and it merits really exploring that connection. For me, I echo a lot of what you said. I think he's definitely a major highlight for me. I think if you consider Star Trek to really be about like us, about humanity, and kind of exploring the basics, basically, of what makes us good or what can make us good, Data is like, I think the original conceit for him was that he's basically Pinocchio. Like he wants to be a real boy, right? And it's the easiest way to allow for discussions about like, well, what is being human without being, cloying and overly like, even if you're dealing with a child, those kinds of conversations don't tend to come in such clean packages. Like kids learn through experience and just kind of absorbing things as they go, and they're too young to understand and have these like deep conversations about like, what is it, like what are emotions, like what is being angry, what is, all these things that Data gets to explore. So the Data's presence, like what he is, allows for these straightforward and complicated discussions about the very, very most basic things about what makes us human to happen. And I think it opens the door in a way that could only be done kind of that way without being really, really nails on a chalkboard on the nose. To have a dad character sitting with a kid on the bed saying, "All right, now listen here, Sonny," and go into this long, over the top, ridiculous monologue about what emotions are. Like that wouldn't play well. But for whatever reason, Data learning with Picard or learning with Riker or learning with Deanna works.
Yeah.
So I think if you, with Star Trek being what it is, I think he's an essential character that allows for a lot of the major discussion points to happen.
Yeah.
In a way that's natural and makes sense. So, yeah. I also think he there is like one of the things that comes to mind because it's recent. There's that episode in Star Trek Picard when Soji asks Picard, like, well, what would Data think? What do you think of Data? Like, describe him to me. And he talks about being like a very childlike innocence. That's very true too. The way he perceives things is very much through like the eyes of a child, somebody who's unimpacted by bias or prejudice. or any preconceived notion that was baked in over the period of time. He's incapable of that.
Yeah.
So that's a refreshing voice to hear as well. There are episodes that I think really put that to the test and explore that in a really effective way too. Yeah. And he's also kind of like the complete mirror image of Spock too, which is always fun to kind of explore. Spock is half human and is kind of running from his humanity. He wants to embrace the unemotional, logical, completely purge. He wants to go through the Kulinar and the motion picture and completely purge emotion and become the perfect Vulcan with, pure logic driving every decision with no emotional bias at all. And there's that great scene in Unification 2 where those two characters are together and they talk about that they are both kind of the embodiment of what the other wants. Spock kind of wishes he had the ability to shut off emotion the way that Data doesn't have emotion, and Data is striving to be more human and to tap into those human qualities that Spock has, but kind of resists and is always kind of running away from. So those two characters are really cool ways to explore similar things, but through completely different lenses. They go hand in hand very well, and that scene in Unification where they're together, I think, is a favorite of mine for sure because of the way that it puts a button on that obvious two-track exploration of humanity. We have AKA Mamel in the Periscope room, mentioning that, talking about what she watched a lot of TNG Season 5 in anticipation of this episode of our discussion of Data. Doesn't think you can summarize Data in one sentence. He was comic relief, he was considerate, he had a unique connection with Picard, and evolved beyond all of that to become a character that you not only love but respected. And then also talks about Data needs Picard and Picard needs Data, like you were kind of talking about. So definitely agree with all that. What else comes to mind for you? Like, are there episodes? Are there scenes? Are there
there's
things
a lot
that really
of
drive home?
There's a lot of things because I think there's definitely specific episodes, and I'd love to talk about specific episodes that come to mind. But there's also specific moments. And it might not be just a specifically Data episode or specifically this episode. It's just, I think the character has such just great moments. I forget the name of the episode, but I'm pretty sure that they're in a turbo lift and he's like saying that, like, your patterns create like a and it makes, he's pretty much telling them that he misses them or he kind of gets used to them. It's just like those little things in the turbo lift. And I don't remember the episode, but
I don't either, to be honest with you.
Those are the kind of moments and things that I remember from Data, along with the episodes, obviously, but just moments like that too are just really small little things that make them really wholesome and I don't know, feel real, I guess.
Yeah, wholesome's a great word for it. A great descriptor. I think the way AKA Mamel kind of put it too, with so many things at once. Like when I think of Data moments, there are comic moments. There are things that are really funny and really light. Brent Spiner is obviously an accomplished comedian, and he brings that to puts that to good use with Data at times. But there's also really heartbreaking, really dramatic, really powerful stuff too. So he really touches all corners in terms of what moments really work. To kind of double back to that, like, childlike innocence and that lack of bias or prejudice or just the lack of emotion, I guess, or being able to process emotion at least. At the end of The Measure of a Man, when he goes to, they're having a celebration because he's obviously won the day. He's not going to be taken apart and taken away from the Enterprise. And Riker had to prosecute the case to do that, to take him away. So Riker's feeling guilty and doesn't want to go to the party that they're having, and Data goes to get him and says, something along the lines of like, if you didn't do what you did, the admiral would have ruled summarily against me because you refused. So the fact that you did your best and you fought the fight saved my life. And like he cut to the core of like exactly what the truth was, like how it happened, and said it in such a plain, simple way that Riker was like, I think he still feels guilty and is going to have to process what he had to do. But that's something that I think most human beings would have a difficult time,
conveying,
dealing with right away. Yeah, so soon. I think that most people would have hard feelings against the person who prosecuted the case against you, against your freedom, and that kind of really, I think, sells his the most childlike innocence, forgiveness, all those things that are kind of hallmarks of the character. Yeah. Always been a favorite little moment for me. There are so many. There are things in Gambit that I just watched. He's in command of the ship because Picard and Riker are both off on this Marauder, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But the way Data plays the command role, there's like little tinges of like Patrick Stewart in it. He changes his body language. He does the little Picard tug on the uniform.
Down,
he clearly is like accessing memories of Picard and has a program running full of things that he's like notched in his memory about what Picard does in certain situations. There's a moment where he like dismisses everybody out of the observation lounge and he just kind of sits there with his hands up and does the whole like I'm pondering. It's just so specific and it's so like it's so clearly he totally sells it. It's like a program running, and he's like gone into a different gear because
that
it's
emulates what he's seen.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. He's putting into some of it's not even like I don't necessarily find like totally recognizable of Picard. Some of the way like he even changes the way he speaks. There are things that come out a little different.
Is different.
When he's talking to Worf. His cadence is different. Yeah, he changes. Something that has clicked, and some of it doesn't necessarily remind me of Picard, but I have in my head like that he's accessing things from like all of his commanding officers, all of the captains he's worked with, respected, and things that he's seen are all kind of being put together into this thing that he's activated because he's in command now. And I love that performance from him in that episode. I think it's super underrated. It's not a Data episode. It's not something that comes to mind like The Offspring or The Measure of a Man or Time's Arrow, which we talked about last week, where it's really heavy Data on the surface of the A plot, but some of Brent Spiner's best stuff, I think, is there.
Subtle things like that just really flesh out and make that character just feel so real and so just all good stuff.
Right. One of the major discussion points that I think has emerged over the years, and maybe it's been around forever, but I kind of started absorbing it in the last handful of years, is the debate of does Data have emotions and just doesn't know it? Is there just do you accept which side of that argument do you find yourself on? Like when you watch the show, when you watch him, do you think he is essentially, until that emotion chip goes on, a computer with no emotion, no feeling at all, or is he, does he have emotions that he just can't put into words, can't have a point of reference on understanding?
Yeah, my headcanon tends to go to that side. I feel like he does. And to me, that just is so cool. And then they kind of talk about it during the series, right? That they kind of explore that they don't really know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know. I just tend to on the side, stay on the side of, he does know how to he has emotions, but he doesn't know how to convey or really process through that yet. Which is kind of a fun, really cool sci-fi concept in itself.
There's enough, I think, in his performance at times that I think sells me on that side of things. An episode that doesn't get talked about very much maybe it's an undervalued tracks for the future. I don't know. His legacy, the one with Tashiar's sister, on the planet. And there's a moment at the end, like after she's basically betrayed Data and the crew. She leaves the ship, and they have a discussion about it. And Data, the way Data reacts to it is typical Data, like unemotional, straight-laced, kind of blank in terms of like there's no hard feelings, there's no disappointment. It's just kind of you did what you did, and and at the end she gives him something. It's been a while since I watched it, so I don't remember like the specifics. But there's the performance Spiner gives where he's looking at it, and it's just him in a hallway, and I think that's a moment that really drives home, just in the performance and the score and the way that he's presented in that scene, that he does feel. He just doesn't quite understand what he's feeling, or doesn't understand that he's feeling anything at all. Like it's he can't process the emotions that are already there. And I think that emotion shift that he gets later on is, in my headcanon, something that just kind of unlocks
what's already there.
That ability. Yeah, it's there. It's in the programming, but that's what allows him to understand what is happening and be able to discuss it and express what he's feeling.
Yeah.
And I think like it's one of those things, like there's another moment in the next phase when Geordi and Ro, they think they're dead, they're cloaked and running around the ship. It's an action adventure story, but the most effective part of that episode, I think, is the crew kind of dealing with the possibility that Geordi and Ro are dead. And there's a scene with Picard in a turbo lift with Data, and Data is, or maybe it's Riker, I don't know. Somebody's with Data, and Data's talking about Geordi.
Yeah.
Talking about the friendship, and the friendship with Geordi is another huge element of Data's character, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe just as important as Picard's like mentor relationship. And when you hear somebody talk about a friend like that, it's hard to imagine somebody feeling or coming up with things like that without having a feeling, without like something in them like clicking with so yeah, those kinds of things, those kinds of moments definitely have me firmly on the side of I think he has more emotion than he lets on, and just doesn't know it, doesn't even realize it. And I find that more interesting than he's just a computer with arms and legs who doesn't really feel anything. I think that's one way to go, and I think Spiner's performance is just way too nuanced and way too complicated to allow that to be how I realize when I'm watching. Like that. I think Spiner just brings way too much to the table for it to be simply this is something with no emotions at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that changes that's why maybe the TNG is so rewatchable, because there are moments like that just sprinkled in that you kind of wonder, like, does he have emotions? It's one of those things where just cool to see.
Yeah, for sure. Again, Mammal says, I think he learned about emotions over time through imitation and whatnot. He feels differently than how humans feel. Yeah, I think that's all true too. I mean, I definitely think a lot of the way he expresses himself comes through observation and watching, everybody around him experience things and emotions. So there is a degree of imitation. Like, this is what you're supposed to do, so he kind of does it.
Yeah.
But there are moments like that, like in Legacy, like I was talking about, where he's by himself, and I think there are things on his person and in his body language and the way he's there. It's subtle and it's almost not there at all, but there's just enough where he's not performing for anybody. He's not doing it for anybody else's benefit or doing it to fit in. That it makes me think there's more there than meets the eye.
Yeah.
I kind of mentioned the Geordi friendship. Do you where do you stand on that? Do you think it's one of the better, or what are your overall impressions of that friendship, the way that it develops, and what it brings to the table for Dave's character?
there's such a deep friendship between them too, and it's I feel like there's not one point, maybe it's just built up over time where you can tell that these two characters have such a deep bond and such a deep friendship. I feel like there's a bunch of times where something happens with Data, something's gonna happen, or something's gonna happen with Geordi or something like that, where they're both really concerned with for each other's well-being and things like that. So again, but I think kind of back to the Picard stuff, there's some aid that Geordi gives to Data as well. Like there's some not just like the friendship moments, but some great advice and things like that. Yeah. So just again, I think I totally agree with you. Just a really important kind of character for Data, almost just as important as you said as Picard for sure.
Yeah, I think they have a unique, especially as the show gets rolling and Geordi's firmly entrenched as like the chief engineer, Data's the chief operations officer. I think the ops officer. I think his relationship with Picard is much more of like a mentor-mentee kind of relationship, and Geordi's on a more level playing field. I think there are things that Geordi can help Data with and can be on the same level with Geordi on that are unique. The fact that they're kind of in the same place in their career, the same rank. How many scenes in The Next Generation over the course of the show in like throwaway scenes or in B plots trying to solve a technical problem, or Data and Geordi kind of like in engineering working on it together. Like they're clearly like they're coworkers. Their work forces them to be together a lot of the time, and there's crossover in what they do, and they have to work together. So I think it's a natural pairing, and I also think a huge component of it, the reason that it works so well for me, is that these are two individuals who had to overcome something. Geordi, it's his lack of his blindness. Yeah, he needs the visor. He's kind of dependent on a piece of technology to really do everything he's capable of doing. And I think he's had to fight through
kind of
adversity
to each other a little bit.
Yeah, I think they relate to each other because they both had to struggle to get to where they are, and they both have to overcome, some sort of a challenge in their ability to get to where they are. Like I think it didn't come easy for either one of them, and in their own kind of ways. The certainly like the academic stuff, the book smart stuff, Data, I'm sure came as easy as it can come to anybody because of his capabilities. He's not a human being. He doesn't have to really learn. But the human interaction stuff doesn't at all for Data. Like that stuff is not easy, and that's a struggle. And I think the yin and yang of their relationship really works well. And I think Data's capable of getting things from Geordi that he's not. That won't come as easily from Riker or Picard even. Like he gets a lot of things from Picard, like we're going to talk about, I'm sure, but Geordi, it comes at it from a more equal place, I think, in terms of friend, like true friend, and not as much maybe mentee,
or
father figure even.
Yeah.
Surrogate father kind of situation.
Yeah.
When it comes to the Picard dynamic, it's
yeah.
What comes to mind for you? Like
the end of season 1, when he's like, they go to the service for Tasha, and so like Data's like asking these questions, and that's kind of I don't know if that's the first time, but that's kind of a really deep time, where a deep emotional time where Data's like trying to work through some things, obviously, but that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. How that kind of relationship starts off.
That's definitely a huge moment in the early days of the show.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the better executed. I think in season 1, and that's a whole discussion too. I think Data is probably one of the characters that is most benefited from I think improved writing over time. I think in the early days of season 1, he's a little simple as far as like a lot of this dialogue comes from a place of, well, what is that word? What do you mean by that? And like not understanding like real basics and
a little too on the nose. Yeah.
Trying a lot of on the nose stuff. Yeah. This is an android who doesn't understand, doesn't know. Yeah. Where I think Skin of Evil might be one of the first points where that kind of discussion happens in a way that really works. It's serious. It's well executed. It's not done for laughs. I think that kind of sets the tone for the kinds of discussions that we see those two characters have for the next 6 years. Processing an event or an emotion or a situation.
There's also some early stuff in the holodeck where they kind of explore that as well. But yeah, I think it just that really kind of kicks off the mentor-mentee, I guess, maybe father figure kind of relationship they have with each other, and then it kind of flows right into the rest of the series, I guess.
Yeah, it does. It becomes one of the staples of the show. I think there are so many examples of things like Picard teaching Data about there's that scene in the beginning of The Defector when Data is playing Henry V.
Yeah.
On the holodeck, and it's just a way to unlock a conversation about humanity and something specific about human nature. There's so many examples of that throughout the show that come in small scenes, big episodes that are really driven by these kinds of things and Data's character. But it's so woven into the fabric of the show that it's one of the essential elements of Data's character for sure. That relationship with Picard. I think. What about at the end of the series? I just watched Descent pretty recently, which is the cliffhanger from 6 to 7, and that's the point when the emotion chip kind of comes into play. They don't use it until Generations, but he gets his hands on it from Lore in that, and they kind of decide to put it in a box and wait until he's ready and continue to do research on it, and not plug it in right away and not destroy it either. Like they're going to kind of keep it. In Generations, he decides to do it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Good.
Well, that's just such a Data move, though. I mean, sees what it's capable of. He doesn't want to become, just a maniac, mad, bad, mustache twirling guy. But
right.
I like that they don't do it right away. I like that they. It's really true to that character to really kind of sit back and analyze and still continue to
be
cautious and continue to be true to that character, which is cool because I think. That chip does unlock a lot of things for that character, but I think they kind of stay true. I guess kind of keep it the same.
Yeah, his first instinct in Descent is to vaporize it. He sits on his desk and he's pulling a phaser out. He's gonna blow it away because he's afraid that it's going to do to him what it did to Lore. He's kind of assuming that. The emotion, and he's also dealing with the one emotion that kind of got unlocked in him by Lore at the beginning of that story was anger, and he didn't. So he hasn't felt anything else. And that Descent is an interesting episode for me. Part 1 of Descent really is about Data feeling emotion for the first time and feeling and having that first emotion be anger. Like despite they're on this away mission, they get attacked by the Borg, and he kills a Borg and enjoys it. Like his first experience with emotion is getting angry and enjoying killing somebody.
Yeah.
And that scares him, and it scares the crew too. And he tries to, it's freaky. And there's this whole scene. He's talking to Deanna about trying to replicate other emotions and other feelings using the holodeck. he puts himself in different positions and tries to replicate all kinds of things to see if other emotions can be triggered. And he's worried that the only emotion that he can experience is anger, and maybe some pleasure at following up with the anger. That's really good stuff. I think that's some of the most important data pieces in the series. Part 2, I think, becomes a more kind of traditional bad guy kind of story with lore and the Borg, and not as into that. I think Part 1's far superior to Part 2, but there's some really important stuff that kicks off, and that's what makes him want to vaporize. He wants to destroy the emotion chip because he's afraid that that's all it's going to do. He doesn't want to repeat that. In Part 2, he's torturing Geordi, and that kills him. He doesn't want any part of that. He wants to destroy anything that had anything to do with putting him in that position. So that, there's a lot of Geordi friendship there getting explored too. So yeah, you're right. His initial instinct is to not do it, to hold off. But in Generations, he does do it, and I think there are some mixed opinions on the success of that movie and the way that it uses the emotion stuff. Yeah. I think there was a strong push to do something big with the character for the motion picture, the first Star Trek: The Next Generation movie. Geordi's certainly, Data is certainly a huge character in The Next Generation, one of the more iconic figures in the show, and I think for the movie they wanted to do something big for him, and that was certainly a big choice. I think the push was also for it to bring in some comedic relief, some laughs for the movie. That movie uses that to try to generate some humor. We haven't talked about Generations a whole lot, and I don't know how recently watched it, but do you have memories of how you felt about the way that movie uses Data and introducing the emotion chip and seeing that different version of Data?
I probably wasn't. I know I'm not a big fan of that, but it's tough because you have this incredible actor. Like, we've seen Brent Spiner flexes his actor prowess throughout the series, but to really change that character, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of it. I think it's just maybe a step too far. I'm definitely on board with the emotion chip, but maybe just could have taken it. You can't go back, I guess, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think Generations, they misstepped. I think they went a little too far. I think I certainly respect the desire to swing for the fences with characters a little bit, find ways to do big things that they weren't necessarily free to do on the TV show. I think on the TV show, they were always, especially in the early 90s, afraid to pull the rug out from under a character and have like a major change happen in the course of the show. Like the changes in characters were done much more gradually, slow burn kinds of pieces of character development, not like radical shifts in, okay, this character is 180 now. Where you leave the TV show and you go into a movie, it's a little easier to maybe sell a big shift like that.
Why couldn't we just do a 90 degree or like a 45 degree turn? Just a little bit, not complete.
Well, I think in First Contact, I think they used the emotion chip much better. I think I'm sure that the headcanon reason for that is years have gone by. Generations is it's brand new, and he's processing it for the first time. So yeah, it's a lot. It's malfunctioning. There is a really good scene, I think, in the astrometrics lab where he wants to have it ripped out of him because he doesn't like what it's making him feel, and Picard and Data have to have this big conversation about you can't just turn it off. Like, people don't turn off their emotions, and in First Contact he does. He has the ability to turn it on and off as he needs to. But I think in First Contact they found a way to use it more to the advantage of the character. It's there. It does. It allows for some comedic moments, but they don't overplay it. He can turn it on and off. He turns it off when they're getting ready to deal with the Borg, and then the Borg Queen turns it on him when he really doesn't want it on. Like, there are good moments made available through the emotion chip in First Contact. I think the writers found a way to make it work much more effectively in that movie than they did in Generation.
Yeah.
And then in the other two, I think in Insurrection, they like write it out right away. Like he malfunctions at the beginning of the movie, and they have to. It's turned off, and I think in Nemesis they don't even acknowledge that it
that got
exists.
retconned.
Either it's not on anymore, or he's gotten so used to it that it's there, but it's subtle. Like he's in command of it. So
yeah, that was my next question. Was in the Picard series, do you think he still has it, or did he turn it on, or is? But I guess.
Well, in the Picard series, it's not physically him, right? It's in the finale.
Physically,
he's
no.
Kind of.
Yeah.
He's just he's kind of a projection of Data, and I think that's even up for debate. Is it how? So I don't want to get too into the weeds with the inner workings of that episode and like the Picard episode, basically. But I think it's open for debate on is it actually like a projection of Data that is Data consciously conversing with Picard, or is it Picard's? Is it just a Picard thing in this simulation?
Yeah.
Is it Picard just letting Data go and having the conversation in his head that he's needed to have for all these years, or is there actually a piece of Data in the simulation that, while Picard was like in there, he could converse with? I think that's something that people will debate, and they're never going to give a
conversation
clear answer
for another day, maybe.
Yeah, it's a conversation for another day. But the important thing there, I think, though, is that it gets to how deeply that relationship resonated for Picard. At least, I think the impact that Data's presence had on Picard was far greater than he would ever let on in the show or even in the movies. I think by the time we get to Picard, and he's had to live with losing Data for all that time, it's become we're breaking up apparently, but I guess we're back. So
cool.
Apologies to anybody who might be watching. In addition to AK Mamel, we may have had some turbulence on the Periscope feed, but the recording will be clean on YouTube, hopefully. So, I mean, I think the Picard season, really, the whole first season is really about the depth of that friendship and relationship.
Yeah.
So what episodes, we kind of already talked, are there episodes that kind of come to mind for you? You think of Data, or there?
Data's Day.
What are the highlights? Data's Day is a huge one. Great day in the life.
Yeah. Quality of life, or is that the quality of life? Or I can't remember the specific. But that one definitely comes to mind. Obviously, The Offspring. In theory, a bunch of peak performance, just a bunch of good episodes, and I think again there's some good stuff of him exploring his humanity, but there's also some really good stuff, like moments that he's had. Obviously there's some good stuff in peak performance, but yeah, those are probably the episodes that come to mind for me. I do like Elementary Tier Data.
It's great.
Yeah, Fistful of Datas. I mean, there's some good, really good episodes in my mind. I think, at least as far as this whole kind of series that we've been going through, I think we've done a really good job of, like, we've done some main characters, like we did Trip Tucker, obviously, and I think that's maybe where Data falls into kind of the bigger characters that we tackled, but we've also tackled some smaller, not so talked about characters as well, Pulaski and Cass. But sorry to get back to the episodes. Those are kind of the episodes that come to mind for me right away. Specific episodes, I know we kind of talked about earlier, moments, but
aka Mabel mentions Genesis, Birthright Part 1, and Phantasms. Birthright Part 1 and Phantasms for sure. Yes. I think with the dream stuff. And that's the thing. I think Data's character, at the end of the day, what it really allows for is exploring like the basics of humanity in a way that, like I kind of said at the beginning, would be difficult to talk about in a way that's credible. Like to talk about such basic things like dreaming, like the absolute fundamentals of relationships and dating, the way that in theory kind of breaks down the very basics of like what is it to be in a relationship, and what's good about it, what's bad about it, what's difficult about it, what's challenging about it, what's beneficial about it. Like those things are kind of how do you do that with two regular human characters of really any age, and just have two people like those conversations don't usually like happen on face value very easily. People find those things out through experience and through observation and through
which we see here with
taking their lumps
in the show.
You see it with Data. Data does try these things, and you see him experience these things, but it also allows for more frank, honest, open conversations that you're not easily going to get to in other ways. I mean, you get like father-son kinds of things. You can see like Sisko talking to Jake in Deep Space Nine about girls and dating, and like that stuff happens, but that's different. I mean, I think the way that it's discussed with Data is on even more like 101 basic level of like, what does it mean in terms of humanity? Like what about our human connection with each other? Like there's a definite difference in the way that those kinds of human experiences are explored and discussed and approached with the way Data experiences them.
Yeah.
Like dreaming with phantasms and birthright, dating and relationships and in theory, parenting and having children in the offspring. There's a ton of it. I mean, just go through the episode. A lot of them are about that at the end of the day.
I like that style. Mm-hmm. I like the essential, the bare bones, the straight to the point type of way they can convey that, because I feel like it can get a little bit overcomplicated at times with people exploring things with not just humanity but other things. So it's really refreshing to see like straight to the point, like just black and white almost, which to me it fits the character. Almost. It does fit the character. So
because he needs it to be black and white. He doesn't understand the nuance. He doesn't understand the more complicated, subtle things about it. He just wants to hear like what's good, what's bad. Like what are the ones and zeros of this? It is or it isn't. It's really simple. And you're right. It's refreshing. It's refreshingly straightforward and simple the way that those conversations happen with Data. They get boiled down to the very basics in really interesting ways. So, are you satisfied with his arc, the way that the character?
Big time. I think it's definitely that's changed though. I wasn't before Picard, and I think this Picard has really done a good job of really satisfying that ending, in a way that kind of makes sense to me. So, I'm definitely satisfied. There is an arc there. I love that we do have an arc. People quote, 90s Trek isn't serialized or anything like that. I think it is, because there's evidence here that this character changes over time with the exploration of humanity and his relationships with the crew, and then kind of culminating kind of at the end with Picard. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Picard really does benefit Data's arc, because it feels Nemesis doesn't feel like such a, depending on your feelings on Nemesis. If you love Nemesis and you're a fan of the movie, maybe it's not as big of an issue. But for those of us who found that movie to be not entirely satisfying, the having Nemesis not be the final note on not just Data but now Picard too, and the way that we process the loss of Data, and like I think it just makes the entire thing a little bit more satisfying. The depth of the loss is explored. The meaning that he brought to Picard's life is explored. The way that he impacted others, having those conversations like in Pieces, where not only does Soji ask Picard, "Tell me about Data," that the follow-up question of what would Data see in you, and Picard having to reflect on that. Like those kinds of conversations are really meaningful, and I think drive home Data's impact on other people. I agree. I think his arc was successful through the Next Generation specifically. His continued striving for more humanity. I think watching him in Encounter at Farpoint, watching him in All Good Things, you do see a change. You see more, just more there. I think he has developed a lot over the course of the 7 seasons, but I think Picard improves the fullness of it through the movies and to the end. You know, full picture of it. Yeah. AKA Mammal agrees. A butterfly that lives forever is not a butterfly. Absolutely. That's
a human that lives forever is not
a human.
Really a human.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about in Time's Arrow, there's that the beauty of that thing at the end of Picard. Data asks Picard, "Turn me off." Like, and he goes over. He talks about that, like the sort of last piece that he needs to have in his humanity is to have it end. You know, nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
And in Time's Arrow, he has that scene with Geordi, kind of being comforted by the idea that he won't outlive all of his friends forever. That other people will outlive and remember him, and that being followed up on watching that scene in Time's Arrow is so much more powerful. That's where it ends up, and that is true, and that he feels that even to the end, years and years later, that's something that's still within Data. I think it's really well done, and he's way up. I haven't done what Jim Morehouse has done over on Trek Ranks with the overall character rankings, which everybody should go check out. It's great. You have to dig through TrekRanks.com to see what he did there, but if I were to do that, Data would be pretty high on my list. I don't know, top 3, top 5. I don't know how high he would get, but he'd be in that conversation for that way upper tier. He wouldn't drop very far. That's for sure for me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that as well.
Yeah, and I think Spiner is one of the better actors to ever come across Star Trek too, because of the difficulty in the performance. I mean, when you factor all that together, like everything that he has to accomplish, and the way that he got people to feel, like to make it credible for Picard to feel that loss the way that he did at the end of Picard, or when you first see Picard in Star Trek Picard,
with
like for a character to make that big of an emotional other people, and
who's
to do
supposed to have an emotionless, very logical kind of It's crazy.
Yeah, to have to convey all of that feeling and all of that impression on other people without expressing emotion through traditional ways, and to be human in all the ways that everybody else is.
Yeah.
It's an incredible achievement. I think Brent Spiner is at the top of the list in terms of level of difficulty for the performance that he gives, kind of like right there with Nimoy, I think, in terms of
big time.
Really having to carve out a fresh corner of the Star Trek universe, and having to do a really challenging thing in terms of the performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we know he's talented. I mean, Masks. A bunch of other, like, he plays other characters in the show too.
Oh yeah.
It's just
Fistful of Days does the same thing. He plays all those different Western characters in the Holoc program. He does it all. I mean, one of the things you find if you watch a lot of like behind the scenes stuff and interviews with the cast, Patrick Stewart especially, when he talks on a lot of these interviews, when he talks about Spiner, the admiration and the respect that he has for that performance is clear as day when he talks about Brent Spiner. I think he's in awe of what he accomplished, and the different things that he had to do over the course of the show was on another level, kind of from what most actors ever have to do, really. I think. So, closing thoughts? Anything you want to wrap up with on the Data front?
I don't think so. I really enjoyed this character. I think there's so much on the table to be explored with this character. Obviously, through 7 seasons, dozens of movies, another show. Just really fantastic character. That's all I got.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Definitely one of the best. Top of the line. Makes TNG as great as it is. I think he's a huge component of TNG's success. And yeah, next week we're going to be back with our next episode in our fantasy draft series. Yes. We're going to be doing a fantasy draft of all 2-part episodes across all the shows. So you're going to see a draft board that includes things like the Menagerie,
past tense,
past tense, Unification, Scorpion, Year of Hell, Shockwave, Such Sweet Sorrow from Discovery. It's all going to be there. If it's got part 1 and part 2 on it, it's going to be one of the options. And we're going to go, I think there are 29 of them. We're going to go 10 rounds. So we're each going to end up with 10. There's going to be 9 left undrafted. And we're really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be tough. There's a lot of good stuff there. There are some huge classics that are in that mix. That's why we're going to go 10 rounds. I think it's going to take quite a few rounds to get through the who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly.
To get through the really thick and thin of the upper tier Star Trek stuff. And then you're going to get into a more middle tier, I think, where it's a more mileage may vary kind of a situation where the classics are all gone, but there's a lot of good there. But it's going to come down to preference. What speaks more to you and which series maybe you're more feeling.
Yeah.
So there's going to be representation from all the shows except for Lower Decks, which doesn't have part 1, part 2. Picard's got 1. Discovery's got 2 now. 3. Discovery's got 3, part 1 and 2.
Yep.
Including That Hope Is You, which was a whole thing. It's technically a part 1 and part 2.
You said any episode that has part 1 and part 2.
We're going to do it.
But yeah. Yep.
We're going to do it, but it's definitely the outlier, the unique one of the bunch.
Yeah.
But because it's got part 1, part 2, we're not going to cut it out. But we're really looking forward to that. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. We've done quite a few. I think this will be our 6th or 7th one, but they've all been to this point from a season, or the movies. We did the movies too.
Yeah.
But doing from individual seasons. But this is going to be our first foray into. It's
going to be big.
Yeah. Doing
encompassing
cross series. Yeah. I think it should be a lot of fun. Yeah. So if you're interested in that, do your homework. Keep an eye. Go over to Memory Alpha and take a look at all the part 1, part 2 episodes, and try to do some legwork on which ones you would prioritize. And it's always fun. It's easy and it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting, but it's easier to think of the shows as individual entities and to do favorites from TNG and favorites from Deep Space Nine and favorites from Voyager. It gets a little more dicey and gets a lot more challenging when you start throwing them all together and trying to parse out, which do I prefer, the Menagerie or Terra Firma from Discovery? When you start mixing in extreme difference, it's a different kind of debate. So no, AKA Mammal, we're not going to do.
That could be a whole thing in itself. That's
I see where you're going with that, because there are examples of 2-part
or 3-part
stories that have different titles, or 3-part stories with different titles. But for the purposes of this video, we're only going to put on the draft board as options episodes that have part 1 and part 2 with the same title in the arsenal. And just 2 parts, part 1, part 2.
Yeah.
So the Improbable Cause of Dice Cast is out. The Enterprise, there's a couple of Enterprise options in there that we kind of work. They're out too. Discussions for another day.
Yes.
Essentially.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Start wrapping up, I guess. You guys know the drill. The discussion does not stop here. Twitter, Discord, probably the 2 best ways. Keep the discussion going. I think that's it.
Looking forward to it. Next week we'll be back with Fantasy Draft, 2-part episodes.
Yep.
And I think that'll do it for this week.
Yep. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.